I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2019/491, the report of the Secretary General on South Sudan. I now give the floor to Mr. David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Council. It's my pleasure to brief you on the two overarching areas of focus of the UN UNMISS mandate, building durable peace and protecting civilians in South Sudan. The peace agreement continues to hold, and the ceasefire, except for areas in central Equatoria, is in process. Just that one simple reality of peace has produced significant change. The drop-off in political violence, based on the trend of past years, has meant hundreds, if not thousands, of people are alive who would otherwise not be. Many displaced families have decided it is safe and time to return to their homes. Since the signing of the revitalized peace agreement, according to IOM, more than 500,000 people have done so, including more than 210,000 who have returned from neighbouring countries. Humanitarian partners report improved access to areas of need, though bureaucratic impediments still continue to dog some operations. Their efforts have been assisted by the rehabilitation of 2,500 kilometres of roads by UNMISS's 5 engineering companies and the World Food Programme projects. And this has enhanced the ability to move food to remote locations in advance of the rains and cut down on expensive airdrops. In fact, together with the opening of river corridors and a reduction in illegal checkpoints across the country, WFP reports cost efficiencies of up to $113 million. The latest food security analysis, however, remains dire. 7 million people are facing crisis or worse. But for the first time in years, some counties will see slight improvements where relative calm has enabled households to resume cultivation. These positive signs come from a very low base, but it's a glimmer of what is possible with peace, and it's vital that this trend continues. Since the signing of the peace agreement, more than 110 rapprochements have occurred in communities across the country. UNMISS has directly facilitated more than a quarter of these. I've attended a number of these meetings, including a recent joint delegation with the IGAD Special Envoy and the chair of RJMAC. Helicoptering into Panyame in central Equatoria, a proposed opposition cantonment site where tensions remain high, we were met by dozens of opposition soldiers. Their welcome was warm, and we sat under mango trees together with hundreds of local people to talk reconciliation. We then flew to Yei, where we met government authorities, youth, women, and religious leaders. This visit showed that while groups are on opposite sides of the political divide, their experiences of war and their hopes for peace are the same. That one example matches what my colleagues and I have witnessed on many, many occasions in recent months across the country where sides have come together. The desire for peace is palpable, and there is a fierce aversion to any renewed fighting. My observation is that the pace of the dialogue and the peace building at the grassroots level is moving much faster than amongst the elites negotiating nationally. The country's politicians need to listen to the mood of the people and follow the lead set by these local communities. In that vein, it's a shame that the national dialogue process has so far failed to achieve the inclusivity required for a true consultative process. This strong desire for peace is echoed in results of a perception survey that we carried out, which interviewed 2,400 people in 10 different locations. The survey exposed the shocking impact of the conflict. 79% of people interviewed reported that members of their family had been killed. The same proportion reported family members forced to flee violence. And yet, remarkably, 89% of those interviews believe there will be lasting peace by the end of the year. Mr. President, we should be frank. The fighting has stopped because the leaders ordered their soldiers to stop. If it resumes against the will of the people, it will be because those same leaders want it and ordered it to happen. In May, the parties unanimously decided to extend the pre-transitional period, delaying the formation of a transitional government until the 12th of November. And while this postponement is disappointing, it does give time to resolve outstanding issues that might have otherwise derailed the peace deal. Implementation is frustratingly slow, and many benchmarks are still to be met. More compromise is needed, particularly from the government, which holds the much stronger position. The transitional constitution that incorporates the peace agreement has been returned to the National Constitutional Amendment Committee for further updates. The International Boundaries Commission reported back last week, and how its conclusions play out in the coming weeks remain to be seen. Security reform and unification of armed forces has been sluggish despite the much appreciated efforts of IGAD Special Envoy Ismail Weiss, and UNMISS is providing political and technical guidance to help parties in line with its new mandate. A fundamental challenge is the lack of regular face-to-face meetings between President Salva Kiir and the opposition leader Dr. Riek Machar. If, at a local level, former bitter enemies can put the past behind them and reconcile, their national leaders must do the same. These leader-to-leader meetings, preferably held in Juba, are critical because trust and confidence can't cold start a day a new unified government is formed. The government should also meet its commitment to release funding it pledged for implementation, as an example to other donors. The African Union, IGAD and the UN have been working collectively to support the process, and we are strongly unified in our position that a 6 month extension, the last 6 months extension should be the last one. We accept that some tasks may not entirely be complete by November, however we define complete, but this should not delay the formation of a transitional government. We should see the peace process as a living document, not set in stone. There are no pre-transitional tasks that cannot be achieved within a unified transitional administration. In fact, there are many advantages to decisions made within a transitional government because they'll be made collectively, transparently, and will be better able to be held to account by citizens. Mr. President, the decision by the UN in 2013 to open its gates to people fleeing for their lives is one of the most noble actions this organisation has ever taken. It saved tens of thousands of people, and it remains at the heart of our protection of civilians mandate. However, our POC mandate also stresses the importance of supporting conditions for safe, informed, voluntary and dignified returns of IDPs and refugees. So far, actual numbers of returns are relatively small compared to the 2.3 million refugees and the 1.9 million internally displaced. But there is a growing trend of return. Prior to the signing of the peace agreement, the number of people returning home each month averaged around 18,000. Since the peace deal was signed, this number has jumped to 76,000 each month. Some families have returned under their own devices, but thousands of others, particularly those living in POCs, will need assistance. Most wanting to go home are women and children without the ability or resources to leave without help. And so UNMISS, UNHCR and humanitarian partners are providing the support in line with the international principles and following the guidelines agreed by the humanitarian country team. A key challenge ahead is the lack of basic services within the communities of return. Today, the most commonly cited reason by IDPs for not wanting to leave a POC is a reluctance to take their children out of school, not insecurity. In parallel, UNMISS is shifting its focus from static duties guarding POC sites to more long-range patrolling, concentrating on those areas of return. A substantial component of UNMISS's effort now is devoted to POC protection. Mr. President, despite the reduction in political violence, fighting continues in central Equatoria, causing ongoing suffering. Early next week, UNMISS will release a human rights report on the situation. But our investigations, I can say, reveal atrocities committed by all sides against civilians, including rape, abduction, killing and looting. In response, UNMISS has beefed up its presence in Yei and matched that with political engagement. Mr. President, protection of civilians will continue to be a top priority, but our protection role will naturally diminish if there is peace. We can then look to adjust our troop requirements accordingly while continuing our mediation and peace-building efforts. In 2 weeks, South Sudan will celebrate its 8th anniversary of gaining its independence. With that sovereignty comes responsibility, an obligation that is acknowledged only rarely, including for leaders to use the country's resources in the best interests of their citizens and not their own. The message from the people of South Sudan that we have heard in that regard is very clear. Live up to your responsibility and give us peace. Thank you, Mr. President.